On May 20th, 2026 in Miami, at a press conference of the Department of Justice, the federal prosecutor read out 7 counts of indictment, 7 counts against one person. Raul Modesto Castro, Ruz, 94 years old. You all know him. He is the former president of Cuba, the younger brother of Fidel, the one who, after Fidel, was the main figure of the Cuban dictatorship from its very first day. 4 out of 7 counts are murder. The murder file was in the drawer of the federal prosecutor's office in Miami for 30 years. Bill Clinton didn't open it, George Bush didn't open it, Barack Obama didn't open it, Donald Trump during his first term didn't open it, Joe Biden didn't open it. Today it was opened. Why? Listen to me very carefully. This is not a legal procedure. This is not an ordinary charge that, dozens come out of American prosecutors' offices every week. This is an ultimatum. Another topic that concerns America today is the ban on the U.S. tax authorities ever opening an investigation related to Donald Trump's business activities with his family and company, with his companies. Is this a repeat of what Biden did with his son and 8,000 people who lied, cheated, broke the law, and got a total pass for everything they did? Or is it just a court decision, that there's no need to check Trump anymore, it's impossible, 20 years of nonstop investigations, it has to end sometime, so what is it, the first or the second? We will definitely find out, or maybe it's something else entirely, right? And now let's get back to the Castro brothers. And why are accusations from 30 years ago making headlines in the world's newspapers? Why now, exactly today? And so the killers have finally been identified in the case of those 6 people whose names have been spoken aloud for the first time in 30 years. And along with them, the one who holds Cuba in an iron grip today, from Havana to Santiago. Today, the world said one phrase. I'll translate it from legal language to a language that will be clearly understood. In Havana, the phrase sounds like this: free Cuba. Or from this day on, do you have nowhere left to go? Not a single airport where your plane can land. Not a single bank that won't freeze your account within an hour after you try to open it. Not a single capital that will shelter you from an extradition request. Caracas, Managua, Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Pyongyang. Every hotel you walk into will get a call from Washington before you even get there. Not a single clinic in Europe where you can bring your 90-year-old bones for surgery. Not a single university in Latin America will accept your children's diplomas. Not a single bank in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, or the Cayman Islands that won't return your transfer with the note "sanctions individual," meaning a sanctioned individual. For 30 years, you thought time was on your side, that the file was just lying there gathering dust in a drawer, that the prosecutors would retire, the presidents would give in, and you would just outlast everyone. And today you realized it's now or never, right now or never. And listen to one more phrase. This phrase is not mine. From the country where I live, from the country to which once, a long time ago, 4 people arrived by ship, whose names you will hear now. Cuba's time is no longer yours. And now, for those who just heard these words and want to understand what we're even talking about, in 10 minutes you'll know everything, who these 4 deceased people are. What happened on February 24, 1996 over the Florida Straits? In international airspace, who killed them, on whose orders? And why did the United States of America wait a third of a century? So that finally 4 names could be added to the indictment. Names you will now learn, names that waited 30 years to be spoken aloud. Carlos, Armando, Mario, Pablo. Let's go. This story doesn't begin on May 20th, 2026. This story begins 5 years before those 4 names appeared in the indictment. In May 1991, a 15-year-old boy named Gregorio Perez Ricardo sailed from Cuba on a homemade raft. He wanted to reach Florida, but he didn't make it and died of dehydration. His body was found by the American Coast Guard. A pilot named Jose Basulto, a Cuban immigrant and a veteran of the Bay of Pigs, landing in 1961 and 1991. By that time, he, a well-off American businessman, had already read an article about this boy and asked himself a question, well, maybe a question we should all ask ourselves. What should a person who has a plane do to make sure the next 15-year-old boy doesn't die? Basulto gathered other Cuban exile pilots. They bought used Cessnas, registered a nonprofit organization, and called it Brothers to the Rescue. From 91 to 19, for 5 years they flew over the Florida Straits hundreds of times, searching from the air for Cuban refugees on rafts, inflatable mattresses, homemade boats, and even car tire tubes. When they found them, they dropped water, dry rations, signal flares, and reported the coordinates to the U.S. Coast Guard, which of course would come and bring the unfortunate people on board. In 5 years, the brothers found and helped save Cuban refugees. Not 5, not 35, no, 4,000. 4,200 people. And here are 4 of those who were involved in this. Carlos Alberto Costa, 29 years old, was born in Miami Beach, the son of Cuban immigrants, a volunteer pilot, flight coordinator, and administrator. Carlos completed 140 missions over the strait and personally took part in rescuing 456 people. Armando Alexander. Alexander Jr., 45 years old, the oldest of the 4, was born in Cuba. U.S. Marine Corps, Vietnam War veteran, sergeant, husband, father of an 18-year-old daughter, Mario Manuel de la Peña, 24 years old, the youngest, was born in the U.S. and was in his final year at one of the world's top aviation universities. And the 4th one is the one who might make you watch this video to the end. Pablo Morales was born in Havana in 1966, graduated from a cartography technical school, and worked as a surveying technician. An ordinary Cuban life with shortages, lines, and no prospects for the future. On August 5, 1992, Pablo did the same thing that 15-year-old Gregorio Perez Ricardo had done a year earlier. He tied together a raft made of boards and empty canisters, took some water, a can of condensed milk, and set out into the ocean. He was spotted from the air, a Cessna saw him, relayed the coordinates, and the Coast Guard picked him up. Pablo survived, got American residency, settled in Miami, and a year later came to Basulto. He said, I want to do exactly what you do. I want to save people. So what happened that day? That day, Saturday, the weather was clear. 3 Cessnas took off from the small Opelika airfield in Florida. The route was standard, the same as hundreds of times before. Before that, over the international waters of the Straits of Florida, north of Cuba, below the 24th parallel, the boundaries of Cuban airspace were never violated. We never entered Cuban airspace under any circumstances. In the first plane was Basulto himself with 3 passengers. In the second were Carlos Costa and Pablo Morales. And in the third were Maria de la Peña and Armana Alexandra. That day, the Cuban Air Force scrambled 2 MiGs at 15:21 local time over international waters, far from the 24th parallel. The first missile, an R-73 air-to-air, hit the plane carrying Carlos Costa and Pablo Morales at 15:27. The second missile hit the plane with Mario Maria de la Peña and Arman Alexander. Basulto's plane miraculously escaped. In the conversations between the Cuban pilots and the base, which will later be decrypted and published by American intelligence, a phrase is heard. 1, 6 pilots, so the MiG. After the first hit, we destroyed him. And the operator's response from the base, well done, homeland or death, damn it. The bodies were not found, only wreckage remained at the bottom of the Florida Straits, and 4 names that from that day on waited 30 years for a trial. The Cuban regime then claimed that the planes had violated Cuban airspace, but all U.S. radars, investigations by international organizations, and satellite data showed the same thing. The planes were shot down over international waters. It wasn't a violation, it was murder in international airspace. President Clinton in March 1996 signed the Helms-Burton Act, the very one that to this day serves as the basis for the American embargo against the regime. The federal prosecutor's office in Miami began drafting charges at the same time in 1996, and the document was ready by the late 90s. The defendant, Raul Castro, was at that time the Minister of Defense, who, according to the investigation, personally gave the order, and the file was set aside to await its moment. And only today, May 20, 2026, 30 years later, The Justice Department under the second Trump administration opened the box, took out the file, and declassified it. Because now it could be put to use. 7 counts of indictment, 6 defendants, including Raul, murder as a separate count for each of the 4. Raul Castro will not come to the courtroom in Miami. He is 94. Havana will not extradite him. But the indictment is not meant for prison. It serves 2 other purposes. First, it is a historical record from this day forward in the official record of the United States. The downing of the brothers is not an incident, but a murder proven in court. And second, it is a legal tool. Sanctions, asset freezes, extraterritorial prosecution of all 6 defendants. Why is this important right now? This week in Havana, there is no diesel fuel, and the power is out for 22 hours a day. More people have left the island in the past 3 years than in all the decades of Castro combined. Those who are now leaving the dark Havana on inflatable boats, these are the grandchildren of Gregorio Perez Ricardo, that 15-year-old boy whose death in 1991 made Jose Basulto buy a plane and start rescuing those who are now sitting without electricity in Havana. These are the sons and nephews of those very Cubans whom Carlos Costa, Armando Alejandre, Mario de la Peña, and Pablo Morales helped rescue in 4,200 cases over 5 years of work. And the regime that 30 years ago killed 4 volunteer pilots over international waters for saving lives is the same regime that today keeps its own people in darkness without diesel. Note, this is not 2 stories, but the same one. The same law that we discuss in the big video about Cuba, Venezuela, and Bolivia when the state attacks secondary property. Oh, by the way, here is that big video I mentioned. It's already available on the channel Roadmap to Freedom, and we'll have a link below. There's a lot of interesting material we're making there. It's just impossible to fit everything into one, so I put it there for those who are interested, who want all the details, the intrigue, and, well, there's a lot of stuff there. If you want, check below. There will be a link somewhere down there. So, first the refugee plot, and then the volunteer test. At the very end, the life of an ordinary citizen in Havana in May of 2026 left without electricity and bread. Carlos Costa flew at Christmas because, as he said, at Christmas, the rafts also go out to sea. Armando Alejandre served in Vietnam, came back, and decided that since he knew how, he was obliged to do it. Mario de la Peña, instead of taking a break before his final year at university, volunteered. Pablo Morales got on this plane 4 years after this same plane had saved him. He owed his life to this plane, and he gave his life for it. Today, for the first time in 30 years, the country they believed in publicly voiced the accusation against Carlos Armando Mario Pablo. And now to the most important person on planet Earth, the person everyone talks about on every TV show, thinks about every minute, and never forgets for a second. At the same time, some adore him while others hate him. You have probably guessed we are talking about the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. The news about the complete ban on any investigations into Trump's economic activities happened the same week as the indictment of Castro on May 19 in the same week. What happened technically? Trump previously filed a lawsuit for $10 billion against the IRS for leaking his tax return, so IRS contractor Charles Littlejohn was convicted and served 5 years. The lawsuit was headed toward a settlement on Monday, the 18th. The settlement was announced on Tuesday, May 19, CMT. Attorney General Todd Blanche is a former lawyer for Trump, currently. So, well, the Maine General Acting U.S. Attorney General added an extra clause to it, a unilateral document added as a hyperlink to the press release. This item literally states that the United States is forever deprived of the right and barred from investigating, reviewing, or bringing any tax claims arising from tax returns filed before the date of the agreement. Who does this apply to? This is the obligation. Donald Trump himself, his sons, the Trump Organization, family trusts, and so on. In exchange, Trump gives up those $10 billion and a fund is created of, I think, $1.7 billion, 1.776. Those were the numbers because, 1776. Symbolically, that's the year of the Declaration of Independence. Trump receives a formal apology from the U.S. government, and that's it. As they say, everyone happily goes their separate ways now. What does this mean? This forever, ever, and so on. This is the strongest wording that exists in English legal language. Literally, forever means permanently barred. This means they are deprived of the right to initiate, and it is dismissed from consideration. The legal effect, the case is considered resolved. Excessive questions cannot be reopened. It acts as law, not just as an agreement. Wow. What does this mean? The next administration, whatever it may be, cannot overturn this just by deciding something. To reopen any investigation into Trump's past declarations, it would require a court to annul the agreement itself, and the agreement would have to be challenged against the plaintiff, Trump, who in that court would at least have all the resources and a good chance. In other words, it's set up to survive not only Trump too, but also any of his successors. Now the American founding fathers specifically designed the system so that the president would not be above the law. Hamilton, in The Federalist, directly distinguishes the American president from the British king by saying that the king is above the court, while the president is not. Here, with what you might call the stroke of a single person, Blanche, unilaterally, added in a hyperlink, forever, one family has been exempted from the effect of a single federal law for all time. So, a historical period. This is not an amnesty. Amnesty is a decision by Congress. This is not a pardon. A pardon is for criminal cases. This is something else, a kind of new legal format. I don't know of a precedent of this scale in American history, and despite asking, I haven't heard of one. To avoid being one-sided, here is the best thing that can be said in defense of this agreement, and that instructing to falsify the declaration was a real crime. Little John was convicted, served time. Someone had to be held accountable for this before the victim being Trump. The series of prosecutions against Trump, that is the Manhattan court case, the Mar-a-Lago case, and other cases, were politicized, and this is acknowledged even by some left-leaning lawyers. The weaponization fund, that is this 1776 fund, potentially protects not only Trump. In theory, any victims of political weaponization of justice can apply there, by the way, including Trump's opponents. In the future, so to speak, if Trump starts pressuring someone, and Trump himself will not receive the money personally, this is structurally important. He does not have personal enrichment there. These are serious arguments. You can't just brush them aside, so to speak. Well, that's my view on this matter because just this week we put together a video about 4 heroes whom the regime cast out of society for believing in equality before the law. Huber Matos, Hilda Molina, Carlos Franchi, and Reinaldo Arenas. And one of the main points of this whole discussion is that a law which is not applied to everyone ceases to be a law. It becomes a tool in Havana against dissidents, in Caracas against the opposition, in La Paz against Santa Cruz. And here in Washington this week, we are witnessing the birth of a construct. One person and his family, therefore, are forever excluded and exempt from investigation. Throughout its entire historical period, from the beginning to today, no one else has such protection. I don't have it, and you don't have it either. In other words, the very thing has been done that made us so outraged with Biden. If Obama had done this, we would have shouted that it was done by a politician with whom many of us agree politically on other issues. But the principle doesn't depend on who violates it. My opinion is that a state which makes an exception to the law for one person is showing that the law is not really a law, but something flexible that can be bent in any direction. The order is expanded once for Trump, next time for the next president, and after 2 cycles, for everyone who knows how to grease palms. Yes, we all know what that means. A personal law tied to a name is czarist prerogative, not Republican law. Do you understand that a law cannot contain a specific name, someone who has received some kind of privilege or who is exempt from some obligation that applies to everyone except him? We are even shocked that Congress got the right not to be on Obamacare, yes. Why? Even though there are no names there, just the name of the institution, right? Why? For the same reason. The republic dies the moment a specific name is written out of the general rule. Once my favorite philosopher Hillel said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." The IRS goes after 160 million ordinary Americans. If the president writes himself out of there, so to speak, then he is not doing to his neighbor what he does to himself. Trump and his sons are now forever protected from the IRS for all the tax returns they filed before. This arrangement cannot be canceled simply by a decision of the next administration. It was done formally not as a privilege, but as compensation for a real leak. And I also need to be compensated because they demanded euros from me too. Not as much, less, but who says I will pay that much money? I will pay less, not 10 billion, right? The real leak of his tax returns really caused him losses. Legally, everything is elegant, but in terms of compensation, it is an unprecedented ethical inequality before the law, formalized forever. I know that some of you will misunderstand me now, so I'll say it right from the start and directly. I don't think that Trump and his family don't deserve compensation. On the contrary, I believe they do deserve compensation for what they've been put through over the last 10 years. Persecution after persecution, the Mar-a-Lago search, the tax return leak, case after case in New York, in Manhattan, in Georgia. It was terrible. And every person who started and allowed this, every prosecutor, every IRS employee who leaked documents, every politician who used the state apparatus as a club against an opponent must be punished. Punished not symbolically, not just a slap on the wrist and 6 months of probation to sit at home, but punished with money out of their own pocket in an amount greater than the damage they caused, with interest multiplied, so that the one who caused harm ends up worse off after paying than the one they harmed, much worse. Because that's what justice is. Justice is not just saying, oh, you were bad, go stand in the corner. Justice is $1 for $1, or better yet, $7 for $1, with interest, with a public trial so everyone can see. If that doesn't happen, the same scenario will repeat in 4 years, then in 8, then in 12. Because no one will learn from a punishment that never happened, like those 8,000 people whom Biden pardoned on the last day of his term. They should be reviewed wherever it's legally possible. Everyone who actually broke the law must be held accountable. Anyone who used their power to harm others for political gain should also be held accountable, including financially. As for America, this isn't just about America. I'm sure the Castro family has property in Europe, in Latin America, and in offshore accounts. And when Cuba opens up one day, it will open up for those people whose homes, businesses, children, and years of life were taken away by the regime. There must be accountability, and the victims should be compensated 100-fold in court for what was taken from them. From the Cuban who lost his workshop in '68, from the American whose son was shot down over the strait in '96, from the doctor who for 15 years had no right to travel to see his own grandchildren. This is not revenge. Revenge is an emotion. This is arithmetic. This is the return of what was taken, plus what should be added for the very fact of taking it away. And this is the justice I want to see. Not forgive and forget, but add it up and pay it back. I believe we will get there one day. Not tomorrow or in a year, but eventually. Because for people who remember what was taken from them, over time something more important than anger accumulates, a bill. And a bill is a document is a claim is a court case, and a court case is restitution. And every day that I work on air, I work so that this bill will be presented. No one is above the law, not the Castro family, not the 8,000 pardoned by Biden, including his own son, not Donald Trump, whom I respect and whose ideas I share in many ways. But the law is the same for him, for me, for you. Because if even one person ends up above the law collapses, the law collapses, the republic collapses, the republic collapses, the world we want to build collapses. Until we meet again.